Welcome. This is May 25th, a rainy day in Alfred, New York. I'm Jerry Snyder here at Sunny Cove Farms News Store. And I have a visiting guest, Peg Coleman from the Society for Risk Analysis. Peg and I just are getting to know each other within probably the last month via phone and email. And we have a common interest. We're here to talk about microbiology and raw milk and food, and hopefully we will learn some things about each other, and also hopefully you'll learn something about the food that you're eating. So Peg, where did you study? How did you get interested in microbiology?
I started my studies at SUNY ESF, the College of Forestry in Syracuse, and from there went on to study at Utah State and at University of Georgia. So I'm an MS squared. I have 2 master's degrees, and the most recent one from Georgia is in medical microbiology. And so my passion has been microbial risk assessment, so how the microbes that we ingest or breathe in or are on our skin, how they interact with us and contribute to health and disease, either way.
What do we have in common that brought you at the farm here?
Well, both of us are advocates for health benefits for fresh unprocessed milk or certified raw milk. So I know Jerry has a farm operation. We're in his farm store, and he's licensed to be able to sell his certified raw milk from the store. And in my little town of Groton, also in upstate New York, my husband and I travel just a few miles to another farm store there to pick up our 2 jars of milk every week. And I first heard about raw milk benefits from an Army risk assessor. Believe it or not, I was in a meeting with some Army colleagues, and he told me that he and his wife had researched the raw milk issues and decided that they were going to buy certified raw milk for their family, and they buy 4 gallons of milk every week and have raised a healthy, happy family on that good product. So ever since then, I've been reading everything I could get my hands on about raw milk and pasteurized milk, and I really have taken a position that's contrary to a lot of what you hear in the press and a lot of what the regulators tell you. And as a risk assessor, I've worked on projects with Society for Risk Analysis so I'm teaming with other people to really look at the evidence in an objective way and challenge some of the faulty assumptions that are problematic in those assessments.
So what we're looking for here is the truth.
Yes.
And then sit down with people that are misinformed, or perhaps what we understand isn't totally accurate, and then through give and take, interactive discussion, finally establish what the truth is, and hopefully come to a consensus so that raw milk can be readily available. We are limited right now by law to on-farm sales only, and that's one thing I would like to see changed, because basically we have a black market out there. And the black market is not inspected, it's not tested, and it's not followed by anybody. So 11 million people a day are drinking raw milk, but a lot of it isn't coming from farms that are being licensed and inspected. So I think that would be an improvement.
Yes.
Initially, is to make the people that are licensed able to sell it.
So good practices are important, sanitation is important, and all the pieces of licensing that Jerry and the other farmers go through to be able to sell you a fresh, safe product. New York State looks very carefully at what it takes to have a good operation. And you and my farmer both have a number of awards for the work that you've done to care not just for your cows and your farm, but for your customers.
What do you know about Listeria monocytogenes in Roundup? One of the things I should start out by saying is the adulterated food law, section 200 of the Ag and Markets Law, states that food is adulterated if it contains a deleterious substance. If, however, it's not an added substance and it's not sufficient quantity to cause illness, it is not adulterated under this subdivision. So that standard in the law book allows for a positive test and a needed quantitative test to establish whether it is actually adulterated. How do you feel? Did I state that correctly?
You did. I should also tell you that I got my start in microbial risk assessment with USDA. So I had worked for almost 20 years for the Food Safety and Inspection Service and Agricultural Research Service in the DC area. So I've done assessments on Campylobacter, on Listeria, on E. coli 15787, on Salmonella. And for all of those pathogens, just the presence of a pathogen is not sufficient to be able to do a risk assessment. You need to know how much is there. You need to know if that density of your microbe is going to grow in your food or not. And you need to know the dose-response relationship. So toxicologists understand the dose makes the poison, but that's true too for microbial risk assessment. So you need to know how the human body processes pathogens that they inhale or ingest. And it's really unfortunate that so many people are so fearful of ingesting or inhaling a single pathogen cell, because our bodies have innate mechanisms to defend against that. And I brought a couple of props here, so I'm going to pull one out. This is a book by an immunotoxicologist from Cornell, Rodney Dieter, and it's The Human Superorganism. So what's that about? Rodney is saying that Homo sapiens, a human being with just our genes, our human genes, is incomplete. That without our microbiota to give us that active immune system that can defend against pathogens and defend against non-communicable diseases, that superorganism doesn't function properly without the microbiota. So together, the Homo sapien and the bacterial genes form a superorganism, and they cooperate. And so instead of fearing bacteria as germs that are going to make us sick, what Rodney and other researchers into the microbiota, the organisms that colonize our skin, our guts, most of our body, those organisms actually make us healthy and help us respond when there are low levels of pathogens that we contact. So the dose makes the poison, and for Listeria, there have been a number of studies that document a fairly high threshold of thousands of organisms before a normal, healthy person would become ill.
I've asked a couple of experts, microbiologists, well-known people, and they stated 100,000
Really?
CFUs per milliliter. So obviously that varies with the conditions of the human that's ingesting it. If you don't have an immune system, if you've been through chemotherapy or something like that, your immune system is non-existent.
And so I could see that. I was thinking of assessments, the assessment that FDA and FSIS did on Listeria. They did not find any evidence of cases of in their simulations. They didn't find any cases for doses less than about 4,000. So that would say that we have the innate capacity to defend against doses of Listeria that high and higher. We don't really have human data for Listeria other than from outbreaks, and those are often people who have compromised immune systems that are more susceptible. So one other finding that surprised me about Listeria is that it was recently associated with deaths, and not from a raw milk product, but from ice cream made from pasteurized milk. And so whether the source milk is raw or pasteurized, it can contain Listeria. And I'm not aware of deaths from raw milk in the recent times, but there have been at least 4 deaths in the last couple of years from this Bluebell ice cream outbreak, and they weren't from the general population, even though that ice cream was distributed across a wide area and it was consumed and did not appear to cause illnesses at all in the general population, but in hospitalized patients who had compromised immune systems, there were infections and illnesses and deaths, but from a pasteurized product. So organisms are going to be present in our foods. Bacteria are going to be present. Most of them are likely to be non-pathogens, but when you find a pathogen, you need to know how much is there before you know if anyone is likely to get sick.
Listeria is everywhere. We all eat a little in all of our food every day. This is from a noted expert in Listeria. So I did some research, and what I found on the CDC was 3 outbreaks of listeriosis on record from pasteurized milk. And the severe one in Massachusetts, I think it was 1983, 5 people died. And they did a follow-up study, the FDA did a follow-up study. And they tested all the bulk tank milk in America. And 5% of all the raw milk in the bulk tanks contained at least one pathogen, specifically Listeria monocytogenes. Then they tested all the pasteurization plants, 600 of them. 2% of all those pasteurized milk plants, 2% of the pasteurized milk contained Listeria monocytogenes. And in that report, they stated that the typical concentration in raw milk was 10 CFUs per milliliter. And they also stated that their conclusion was that pasteurization was a safe process that reduced pathogens to safe levels. So they have a safe level for pasteurized milk, but we have a 0 tolerance for raw milk.
I was working in USDA. I had opportunities to learn more and study predictive microbiology. So people who study that discipline might do culture-based studies. So you're giving a bacteria optimal conditions, a rich culture broth, very controlled conditions, and you can get growth curves that are replicable. Now you put that microbe in a food, especially a non-sterile one, and all bets are off. You're not going to see the optimal growth that you saw in the culture medium when there's a microbiota in the food to compete with the pathogen, especially if the pathogen's only present at 10 CFU per mil. So when fresh, unprocessed milk is sampled for its microbiota or the culturable organisms, you might expect 10,000. What's a typical standard plate count for milk that comes out of your dairy?
1,000.
1,000. So if you have 1,000 bacteria per mil of good bacteria and 10 bacteria per mil of Listeria, that's quite a differential. And ecologically speaking, Listeria is unlikely to be able to grow, and certainly is not able to grow at the optimal levels that it would in a pure culture broth without any competitors. So that's basic microbial ecology and microbial ecology of foods. While we're talking about Listeria and what we might ingest, I brought another book with me. This one is called Foodborne Microbes Shaping the Host Ecosystem. So 10 years ago, we would not have even thought of the bacteria in our bodies shaping our ecosystems. But here we are in 2016, Rodney's book, The Human Superorganism. So what is it about our microbial partners, our microbiota in our guts that is influencing our notions about risk? So the editors of this book made a statement that we might ingest 10 billion organisms in our food and water every day, and that probably less than 1% or 0.1% of those organisms might be pathogens. So when you when you set up a competition where you have a dense beneficial microbiota and you add 10 listeria, it's very, very, very unlikely that you would get any illness, any infection, because you have the protection of your microbiota, your gut microbiota.
Kind of like when the teacher leaves the room, all the kids can do whatever they want, but when your immune system is intact, the good bacteria will keep that in check.
And also, I've seen data from the Ann Haynes study that maybe 10 or 15% of samples that were analyzed serologically for listeria showed antibodies. So that means that we're getting low levels of listeria pretty regularly, and a good portion of our population is already protected against listeria challenge.
What if I'm in a regulatory position and I have to pick and choose what levels are acceptable? What can I do to protect those people that don't have a healthy immune system, that are really prone to disease or illness, if I open the door and let a small amount be okay?
So I was a regulator at one point in my life. Now I'm a consultant, and so in my work, I'm preparing scientific support. Army and EPA have been two of my major clients, but I have also worked for FDA and USDA as a consultant. But my standard is to evaluate the data and to be as objective as possible. And I find that the positions that are where regulators state a safe level are often not supported by scientific evidence. I mean, it's a complicated process to come up with a safe level. And I certainly understand that for immunocompromised people, the safe level could be 0. So you really might want to have sterile foods for people that are that susceptible. But for even children and the elderly, their immune systems are going to benefit by exposure to bacteria at low doses. That's how their immune system develops, is with exposures to bacteria early in life. And what in Rodney's book, he speaks about non-communicable diseases, asthma, allergies, and he's drawn links between breast milk feeding and formula feeding, that the children that don't get the breast milk, their immune systems don't develop normally. They suffer more health problems, more respiratory diseases, more allergies and infections. I've heard eczema. There are a huge number of studies that Rodney documents in this book that raw breast milk or raw cow's milk could alleviate. One other group of regulators has taken a much different position than CDC and FDA in our country. And so the UK has a food standards agency, and they have taken an evidence-based position that raw milk is safe for healthy adults. And so that's communicated in a 2015 report that's available on the web. And the Food Standards Agency describes two different approaches to risk assessment. One is a top-down approach, and CDC takes this approach often, where they look at epidemiologic data and they try to assess increased or decreased risk for populations that they follow in their studies. There are limitations to that type of data. So outbreaks, the conditions that cause outbreaks often are not your normal daily conditions. And so those data are going to overestimate risk. So I'll repeat, the dose makes the poison, and just having a positive, that's not enough to say you have a situation that's a threat to public health. It's just not true. So I think for objectivity and fairness, the CDC should look at the production data from the certified raw milk farms and give figures on illnesses associated with their farms over the 40 years of operation. It would actually be possible to consider changes in the testing laws even. If you really only needed to detect when listeria was 100 CFU per mil instead of 1 or 10, that test might cost less. You could do it more frequently and ensure greater safety of the product. Microbial ecology of foods and the microbiota of milk, it does challenge a lot of the thinking that just finding one pathogen cell is a health risk. I don't think that's true.
So Peg, what are your concerns about risk assessments on raw and pasteurized milk?
The UK, I've already mentioned, has two different approaches to their risk assessments. They will do a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. So I described top-down using epidemiologic data. So I wanted to just briefly introduce you to bottom-up approaches. There you're looking at data from the milk. So the prevalence of a pathogen, its level, the density or the number of counts, whether it will grow or not, and at what temperatures. So the predictive microbiology that I spoke of before, that kind of modeling comes into the risk assessments here. You might simulate servings that are contaminated, and you need to link that contaminated serving to a dose response model to predict whether the dose is high enough to cause illness. So that's bottom-up approaches. One of the problems in risk assessment is that the data are nearly always incomplete, and so you have to use data that aren't really representative of your system. So FDA assumed that the growth rate for listeria was the same for pasteurized and unpasteurized milk, and that's just not true. So there's been a recent study that's shown as you increase pasteurization temperature, the growth rate for listeria actually increases. So why would that be? It's because you're killing off the competing microbiota that keep listeria growth down in the fresh unprocessed milk. So really those assessments need an update to be able to address what we know now about the microbial ecology of foods and the milk microbiota.
So what you're saying is we need to go a little bit deeper in our understanding beyond just presence and absence, but how it actually multiplies and impacts the consumer. Exactly. Instead of just a positive negative test.
Exactly. So that prevalence number is insufficient. You cannot predict risk from that number. You need to know a lot more for this bottom-up approach to work. The argument that raw milk is riskier because it may contain pathogens, all raw foods are going to contain bacteria and they may contain pathogens. But again, from ecological principles, the beneficial microbiota in breast milk or bovine milk is protected. It does outcompete pathogens and primes the immune system, strengthens your gut microbiota. There are all kinds of benefits that are associated with a healthy milk microbiota and a healthy superorganism.
Human breast milk and nursing babies is an area that's come back into vogue compared to a lot of formula feeders years ago. Is there an awareness that that's not pasteurized?
It's interesting. Maybe I'll segue over into a project that I've been developing with Society for Risk Analysis. So on this slide, you'll see a description of the webinar series, and Rodney Dietert, who wrote this book, he was our first speaker on protecting the human superorganism. Our second speaker was Michelle McGuire, and she spoke on the breast milk microbiota. And there's a book that was edited that's shown on this slide, Prebiotics and Probiotics in Human Milk. So she describes human breast milk as Mother Nature's prototypical probiotic food, that the living components of breast milk actually enhance an infant's health and development and growth.
When people return to breastfeeding babies, I know that raw milk, cow's milk, is advertised as being dangerous. Is there a correlation with human breast milk being raw? Do people connect those two?
I think that animals can't survive on a diet of pasteurized milk, either breast milk or bovine milk, but they can survive solely on a diet that has the protective milk microbiota.
So you're referring to Ponder-Price research with the cats?
Oh, no, I was actually thinking of cat studies and rat studies, and even human studies. There are very large cohort studies where children are fed certified raw and pasteurized milk. They do better and have less infectious diseases than the children raised on pasteurized milk. There are at least 8 different studies. So yes, the microbiota matter, and having that microbiota in breast milk or in bovine milk does provide the offspring or us adult consumers benefits.
You know, that's consistent with organic farming. If you look at industrial farming, they'll use chemistry to kill a plant or plants that are growing in the field and then try to reestablish something growing. Where our approach in the organic realm is to feed the soil what actually the livestock in the soil, you know, the bacteria, the protozoa, the fungi, all that.
Yeah, bacteria are all around us in our environments, in our barns, in our farms, in our subways.
So if you feed the good bacteria what they need to proliferate and take over, and then you're encouraging good production of grasses. We just finished yesterday about 250 bales of baleage, and we've been using high calcium lime and manure on our existing sod. Probably has been in sod for 50, 60 years. And it's amazing the yield response because we actually have nature working for us. Those living livestock in the soil are working full time and feeding the plants so that we get greater yields.
Mm-hmm.
And this works in the human health as well. When we ingest our food, if we are taking in probiotics, prebiotics, and the foods that have the right bacteria, then we'll have a healthy immune system. How does the typical consumer, where can they go to get information, to get educated? Can you help with that?
So the first place I would send people is to the American Society for Microbiology website. And this is one of the reports that's available free online. So you can download this. It's geared toward public education. It's not quite as dense as this particular ASM book that's really geared toward microbiologists. But this is a publicly available resource. It's a resource on the human microbiome, frequently asked questions. It's fascinating, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's concerned about their health and who is looking to whole foods to be more a part of their diet.
So a housewife could understand what's in that?
Yes. I'm not sure if my mom or my grandmother would understand, but I would sit down and show walk through it with them. And I think that anyone can appreciate that we have a diverse, abundant gut flora that protects us. I think that probably is more accepted. When this human microbiome project started, people at that time expected breast tissue to be sterile, and they found that was not true. So the human breast was not even one of the niche areas in the initial human microbiome project. It wasn't until some years later that Shelley McGuire and others found evidence that even the breast tissue itself is not sterile. So cow udders are not sterile, and the milk microbiota is not contamination. It's there for a reason, to feed the offspring, to provide the kind of immune stimulation that a healthy organism needs. One other place where you can find information about science and raw milk is on my new Facebook page.
There's more bacteria out there than just pathogens, and they dominate. They are the rulers of our human body, and we need them to be healthy. We need to feed them the things that will cause them to flourish. And living foods are a really important source if we want to be healthy. I know that many times all we read in the news are the pathogens and how dangerous they are. But there's not many articles written about healthy bacteria and how they thrive and create a healthy environment for us. So there's another side of the coin that needs to be brought to the table and discussed so that we can understand better how to regulate our diets.
So the Society for Risk Analysis project that I've been developing with my colleagues in New Zealand and Australia, we intend to have some scientific papers that are published from that work, but also some educational materials that are geared for different target audiences. Wherever you are in your learning curve about the milk microbiota and its benefits and risks, there are resources out there to help you explore and learn more.
Do you think that farmers that are actually producing raw milk could gain in understanding and in their practices by being aware of these things?
I actually think it would be helpful for the farmers to be able to talk to their customers about some of the ecology, and when there's a headline about raw milk kills, you need to be able to counter that and bring scientific evidence, or at least point to it, that a lot of the positions that are taken that you see in headlines are not backed up by science, and so you need to help people learn to be skeptical enough to educate themselves and to not take the headlines at face value.
You know, I've experienced this personally as a dairy farmer. Actually, the reason I started to be a dairy farmer was because I believe in the product that I produce. And I believe it's health-giving. It's a living food. I believe the way that we manage this farm is a perpetual type of management. We're a grass-based dairy. The animals thrive here. Everything thrives here, even the wildlife. And people sometimes ask me, doesn't it bother you to see all those deer out there eating your grass? And I said, no, that's a pat on the back. That means I'm not disrupting their environment to do what I'm trying to do. But when I first started encountering negative outlooks towards raw milk from regulatory people, I really didn't have a factual basis to respond to them. I had more of a faith basis that I believed it was a good product, but I didn't understand the science. I've really had to dig and find out what is going on in the microbiological world. What is actually taking place there? Because I knew that the regulatory people were being very cautious and trying to be thorough in their work to protect consumers so they wouldn't have illness outbreaks. So until you're educated, until you understand all the details of science, you really not in a secure position to defend yourself, even if you're not doing anything wrong. So I'd like to encourage people to get educated. We actually are sitting in the Sunny Cove Farm store, and right over my head is a library that awaits the floor to be finished. And then we will have a lending library with materials such as these and videos and presentations that you can come here and learn more so that you are healthy and fully knowledgeable about the food that you eat. I want to thank you for your attention today. I hope this wasn't too long-winded, but I hope you've learned and hope you can continue to learn so that we can have good health. Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me, Jerry.
It's good to meet you, Peg.